When Sujin finally discovered the truth on that devastating evening that would become a permanent dividing line in her life, marking everything as clearly before and after, it wasn't just her heart that shattered into 1,000 irreparable pieces scattered across the floor like broken glass. It was the carefully constructed image she had painstakingly built of herself over years of dedicated hard work and intentional self-improvement. The fragile confidence that had taken countless therapy sessions, dozens of self-help books, and daily positive affirmations to build slowly from nothing, and the absolute certainty that she knew the clear difference between true love and a well-rehearsed illusion specifically designed to keep her in place, docile and compliant. In that moment, standing completely frozen in the middle of the elegantly decorated living room with its warm ambient lighting, casting soft shadows on the cream-colored walls, and the sweet scent of vanilla birthday cake still lingering pleasantly in the air mixing with expensive perfume, with all the words she desperately wanted to scream stuck painfully in her throat, like shards of glass cutting her from the inside, and her eyes burning intensely with unshed tears that threatened to spill over at any second and reveal her complete devastation to everyone watching. She realized with devastating crystal clarity that she had spent months methodically molding herself, reshaping her entire personality and core identity to fit into a space that was never designed or meant for her in the first place, like trying desperately and futilely to force a square peg into a round hole until all the edges wore down completely, and she no longer recognized her own shape or form. And the worst part of it all, the thing that made her stomach twist violently with nausea, and her hands shake uncontrollably with a mixture of pure anger, profound grief, and utter disbelief at her own blindness, was knowing with absolute certainty that she had consciously chosen to ignore every single warning sign, every red flag that waved frantically right in front of her face demanding attention, every time her gut instinct screamed at the top of its lungs that something was fundamentally wrong with this picture-perfect relationship that seemed too good to be true from the very beginning. But before I tell you exactly how she arrived at that devastating moment of realization that changed everything, before I walk you step by painful step through the gradual unraveling of a love that never really existed authentically in the first place, but was always a carefully constructed illusion, I need you to understand completely how it all began, how the seeds of destruction were planted from the very first meeting that seemed so magical and perfect, because nobody wakes up one ordinary morning and consciously decides to give up on themselves completely, to erase their own identity systematically for the sake of someone else's comfort and control. It happens slowly, almost imperceptibly, like the changing of seasons or the aging process, in small, silent surrenders that seem insignificant and meaningless at the time, in forced smiles that don't quite reach the eyes anymore, leaving them dead and hollow, and in important words that remain forever unspoken, until they calcify and harden into bitter resentment that poisons everything, until one day you look in the mirror with genuine curiosity and no longer recognize the stranger staring back at you with hollow eyes and a smile that belongs to someone else entirely, someone you don't know and have never met. Before I continue with this story that might mirror your own painful experience in ways that feel almost uncomfortably familiar, hitting too close to home and opening old wounds you thought had healed, I want to ask you something from the very bottom of my heart with complete sincerity and genuine care for your well-being. If you've ever been through something similar in your own life, if you've ever felt invisible within your own relationship, as if you were a ghost haunting your own life, without substance or voice or agency, or if you've ever doubted your own fundamental worth and questioned your very existence and purpose, because of someone who was supposed to love you unconditionally and protect your vulnerable heart from harm, please leave a like on this video and subscribe to the channel so we can build this community together. Turn on the notification bell because I genuinely want more people out there in the world to know with absolute certainty that they're not alone in this specific kind of pain, this particular brand of heartbreak that comes from the slow, gradual process of losing yourself piece by piece until nothing remains. Tell me in the comments section below where you're watching from, what country or city you call home, and if this story reminds you of something you lived through yourself, something you're still recovering from even now after all this time. This space is specifically for us to support each other mutually, to share our deepest wounds, and our healing journeys together, without judgment or criticism, without shame or blame, with open hearts and open minds ready to receive whatever truth needs to be spoken. And rest assured, even if you feel completely isolated right now in your pain, trapped in darkness with no way out, you are not alone in this struggle. You have never been alone, even when it felt that way. When Soo-jin met Min-ho on that fateful spring day that would irrevocably change the entire trajectory of her life in ways she couldn't possibly have imagined in her wildest dreams or worst nightmares, she felt as if life had finally pressed the restart button after years of accumulated disappointments and false starts that led nowhere but dead ends and broken promises. It was an ordinary Saturday afternoon bathed in brilliant golden sunlight that streamed through the large windows at a small, cozy coffee shop tucked away on a quiet side street where she used to spend Saturday afternoons religiously as part of her weekly self-care routine, reading alone at her favorite corner table near the window with the best natural light, and enjoying the tranquility and peace that only voluntary silence and chosen solitude can bring to a restless soul searching desperately for meaning and purpose in an increasingly chaotic world. The shop smelled wonderfully like freshly ground coffee beans mixed with vanilla and cinnamon, creating an intoxicating aroma that made her feel safe and comfortable, and soft jazz music played in the background just loud enough to fill the comfortable silence without being intrusive or distracting from her book. The walls were painted a warm cream color and decorated with local art, and the furniture was mismatched in a charming way that felt authentic and unpretentious. She had just ordered her usual latte with an extra shot of espresso and a sprinkle of cinnamon on top when he appeared seemingly out of nowhere in the line beside her, standing close enough that she could smell his subtle cologne that was expensive but not overpowering, with that calm, disarming smile that seemed to slow down the entire world around them and make everything else fade into soft focus, like a photograph with selective depth of field where only he remained sharp and clear. He was handsome in an understated, quiet way that grew on you slowly, not the kind of person who immediately catches your eye in a crowded room demanding attention and validation, but someone whose attractiveness reveals itself gradually in layers the more you look, like peeling an onion to discover new depths. He was tall, probably 6 feet, with dark hair that was professionally styled but not overly so, and warm brown eyes that crinkled at the corners when he smiled, showing genuine emotion rather than practiced charm. He had strong hands with long fingers, and wore a simple watch that looked expensive but understated, suggesting good taste without being ostentatious. He ordered the exact same thing she did, a latte with an extra shot and cinnamon, and when he noticed this seemingly meaningful coincidence that felt almost like fate or destiny bringing them together, he turned to her with genuine interest written all over his face and made an offhand comment about them having the same taste in coffee, his eyes crinkling at the corners with genuine warmth that seemed real and unguarded rather than calculated or manipulative. Soo-jin smiled back somewhat awkwardly because she was never naturally good at talking to attractive strangers without feeling self-conscious and wondering if she looked okay or had something in her teeth, feeling her cheeks flush slightly with embarrassment and heat. And that brief exchange was enough for him to strike up a conversation that flowed more easily and naturally than she expected, without the usual awkwardness of first meetings between strangers who know nothing about each other. He asked if she came to this coffee shop often, and if she had other recommendations in the neighborhood, what she was reading, and if it was good, and if she'd recommend it, if she liked this place specifically, or just needed somewhere quiet to read away from distractions. And his questions felt genuine and interested rather than like a practice pickup routine he'd used successfully on countless other women before her. He was the type of person who seemed straight out of a Korean romantic drama, the kind of idealized male lead that every woman dreams about meeting someday, but never actually expects to encounter in real life, kind and gentle without being fake or putting on a show for her benefit, attentive to her words and body language without being overbearing or possessive or creepy, with a calming presence that wasn't invasive or demanding, but rather comforting and safe, like wrapping yourself in a warm blanket on a cold winter night when the wind howls outside and the world feels dangerous. They talked easily for almost 2 full hours that afternoon, losing track of time completely as one topic flowed naturally into another, without forced transitions or awkward silences. And when Soo-jin finally glanced at her phone, and realized with genuine shock how late it had gotten and how long they'd been talking. The sun was already setting outside the large windows, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange, pink, and purple, like a masterpiece painting, and she had shared more about herself, her dreams and aspirations for the future, her fears and insecurities that she normally kept hidden, her past disappointments and heartbreaks than she usually did with anyone, even her closest friends who had known her for years and had earned her trust slowly over time. He truly listened with full attention and presence, not just waiting politely for his turn to talk like most people do in conversations where they're really just thinking about what they want to say next, with his warm brown eyes fixed intently on her face, as if she was the only person in the entire world who mattered in that moment, asking thoughtful follow-up questions that showed he was actually processing and thinking deeply about what she said and cared genuinely about her answers and her inner world, questions that demonstrated genuine interest and curiosity, rather than polite obligation or social convention or trying to impress her. And for the first time in a very long time, after years of feeling like she was screaming into a void with nobody listening or caring about what she had to say, Soojin felt truly seen as a complete person with depth and complexity, truly heard and understood on a fundamental level, truly valued as a human being with thoughts and feelings and experiences that mattered and deserved attention and respect. It was intoxicating, addictive even. This feeling of being seen and understood. She didn't want it to end. She wanted to stay in this moment forever, suspended in time. When they finally exchanged phone numbers as the coffee shop was closing for the evening, and the employees were cleaning up around them, Soojin felt a flutter of excitement in her stomach that she hadn't felt in years. Maybe not since she was a teenager experiencing her first crush. That night, she lay in bed unable to sleep, replaying their conversation over and over in her mind, analyzing every word and gesture for hidden meaning, smiling to herself in the darkness of her bedroom like a lovesick fool. When he texted her the next morning with a simple, "Good morning, I really enjoyed talking with you yesterday. Would you like to get dinner sometime this week?" She felt her heart skip a beat, and had to resist the urge to respond immediately, forcing herself to wait a reasonable amount of time so she wouldn't seem too eager or desperate. In the first few months of their relationship, those intoxicating honeymoon days that felt like floating on a cloud high above the mundane problems and responsibilities of everyday life, where nothing could touch them, Minho made a deliberate and consistent point of showing her in countless little ways throughout each day how special and unique she was to him, how different she was from anyone he'd ever met before in his entire life, how grateful he was that fate had brought them together in that coffee shop. He sent thoughtful, personalized messages early in the morning before work, saying he'd woken up thinking about her and couldn't wait to see her again, that she had appeared in his dreams, showed up unexpectedly at her workplace with her favorite hot coffee prepared exactly how she liked it, with the extra shot and cinnamon, and a wide, genuine smile that made her coworkers tease her playfully about how lucky she was to find such a thoughtful and romantic man who clearly adored her, and said phrases that seemed straight out of a perfectly written romantic script. Meaningful things like, "I've never met anyone so authentic and real. You're not fake like everyone else I've dated." Or, "You make me want to be a better person, to challenge myself and grow beyond my current limitations." Or, "I can't believe someone like you actually exists in this world. I thought you were too good to be true, like a dream." Soojin believed every single word without question or doubt, because she desperately wanted to believe them with all her heart and soul, because they fed a deep hunger in her soul that had been starving for years, crying out for this kind of validation and recognition and love. After what felt like a lifetime of feeling invisible and overlooked, like she was transparent or didn't exist. After a long string of failed relationships that ended abruptly without adequate explanation or closure, leaving her wondering, confused and hurt what fatal flaw she possessed that made her fundamentally unlovable and disposable to everyone she opened her heart to, and after countless nights crying alone into her pillow in the darkness of her bedroom, wondering what was fundamentally wrong with her core being that made her not enough for anyone no matter how hard she tried, finally someone saw something in her worthy of being loved deeply and completely, worthy of commitment and devotion and loyalty, worthy of being chosen above all others as the one person who mattered most. She began to imagine a future with him in vivid, elaborate detail, painting elaborate mental pictures and scenarios like a movie playing in her mind. Romantic trips to places she'd always wanted to visit, like Paris with its Eiffel Tower, and charming cafes and artistic atmosphere, and Santorini with its white buildings and blue domes overlooking the sparkling sea, a bright apartment full of plants with sunlight streaming through large windows, and that wonderful rich smell of freshly brewed coffee they would make together every morning while discussing their dreams and plans for the future, and laughing about inside jokes, deep philosophical conversations about life and meaning and purpose, while watching the sunset from the balcony wrapped in each other's arms under a soft blanket sharing warmth. Maybe even marriage and children someday if things continued this perfectly on their current trajectory, and they both wanted the same things. It was an idealized love, the kind that makes you think you've finally been chosen by the universe after waiting so long and paying your dues, that it's finally your turn to be happy and fulfilled after years of paying your dues in loneliness and disappointment and heartbreak, that all the pain and heartbreak you experienced was just preparing you and teaching you necessary lessons so you'd appreciate this perfect person when they finally arrived in your life at exactly the right moment. But what seemed on the surface like the beginning of a perfect fairy tale romance with a guaranteed happy ending was actually hiding the insidious start of a silent confusion between genuine love and unhealthy dependency, between true affection and subtle manipulation and control, between seeking external approval and maintaining self-worth and healthy boundaries, between being truly seen and appreciated and being gradually consumed and erased until nothing of the original person remains. But at that early point in the relationship, during those rose-colored early months when everything seemed perfect and magical, Soo-jin still couldn't see the warning signs that were already there from the very beginning, glaring and obvious in retrospect, but completely invisible when you're wearing rose-colored glasses that tint everything beautifully and make red flags just look like flags. She was too busy feeling complete and whole for the first time in her adult life, too intoxicated and drunk on the attention and affection and validation, to notice the small, subtle ways he was already starting to shape and mold her gradually into someone else, someone more palatable and acceptable to him, someone who would never challenge or question him. Her friends commented with a mixture of happiness for her finding love and growing concern about the changes they were observing, that she seemed different somehow, more radiant and glowing with happiness, but also somehow less herself, less recognizable as the person they'd known for years. And she attributed absolutely everything positive in her life to him, to his magical presence, to the joy and meaning he brought to her otherwise empty existence. She posted carefully curated photos of them together on social media with passionate romantic captions that made her followers envious and wish they had what she had, what appeared to be perfect love, responded to his messages within seconds, no matter what she was doing or who she was with, because keeping him happy and satisfied felt like the most important thing in the world that superseded everything else, including her own needs, reorganized her entire schedule and social life just to fit in. The plans and activities he proposed without considering what she might want, even when it meant canceling long-standing commitments with friends who had been there for her long before he appeared in her life, and would likely be there long after, if she didn't push them away completely. And Minho seemed to really like and encourage this devotion, this willingness to reshape her entire life around him and his needs and wants and preferences without complaint. He praised her dedication and selflessness with that warm smile that made her heart skip and her stomach flutter, said he'd never found someone so present and emotionally available, so willing to make things work and put in the effort and sacrifice that relationships require to survive and thrive. Soo-jin felt genuine pride in that assessment, proud that she could be exactly what he needed and wanted, proud that she was finally good at relationships after so many failures. She thought she was finally being the perfect girlfriend, the kind of partner she'd always aspired to be after learning from past failures and mistakes, that she'd finally learned to love the right way after all her previous mistakes and relationship failures that ended badly. Little did she know that she was, gradually and systematically without fully realizing what was happening, learning to forget herself completely, to erase her own needs and desires and preferences and boundaries, to become a supporting character in someone else's story, rather than the protagonist of her own life with her own goals and dreams and aspirations. Little by little, so gradually that she didn't notice the shift happening in real time until it was too late to reverse course, Sujin began to notice small changes in his behavior and attitude toward her, subtle shifts in the dynamic between them that made her uncomfortable, but that she couldn't quite articulate or put into words. The sweet compliments and words of affirmation started giving way gradually to comments that sounded light and joking in tone, but left a bitter, uncomfortable taste in her soul that she couldn't quite shake or forget, no matter how hard she tried. The first time it happened clearly enough that she couldn't ignore it or pretend it didn't happen. She was laughing loudly and freely during a dinner with her close friends at a bustling restaurant full of other happy diners enjoying their meals, telling an animated and funny story from work with grand gestures and sound effects, completely relaxed and in her element, being herself without filters, when she felt his gaze fixed on her from across the table, his expression unreadable, but somehow disapproving and cold, his mouth set in a thin line of displeasure. Later that evening, on the quiet drive back home through empty streets with streetlights casting moving shadows across his face, Minho commented casually, in what seemed on the surface like a joking tone, but with an edge underneath that cut deep, that she had seemed a bit over the top tonight at dinner, that she was drawing too much attention to herself, and it was kind of embarrassing for him to be associated with that behavior, that maybe she should be more aware of how she comes across to others and try to be more reserved and ladylike and appropriate in public settings. Sujin laughed nervously at the time, somewhat disconcerted and caught completely off guard by this criticism that came out of nowhere, trying to disguise the sharp discomfort that began settling heavily in her chest like a stone sinking in water, trying to convince herself that he was joking and she was being too sensitive. But that seemingly innocent phrase kept echoing in her head for days afterward, repeating on an endless loop that she couldn't stop no matter what she did to distract herself. Was she really over the top and embarrassing? Did people find her annoying and attention-seeking? Was she embarrassing herself and everyone around her without realizing it? The self-doubt crept in slowly like poison, spreading through her system, contaminating everything. The following week, when she went out with the same group of friends again at another restaurant for their regular gathering, Sujin noticed with dismay that she was unconsciously controlling the volume of her own laughter, keeping it quiet and restrained and appropriate, carefully measuring her words before speaking them aloud, avoiding being the center of attention or telling stories the way she naturally would with enthusiasm and animation, shrinking herself to take up less space in the world. And Minho didn't even need to say anything critical this time. She had already internalized the criticism completely, already learned the lesson he was teaching her about acceptable behavior for women, already begun the insidious process of self-erasure that would continue for months until she was unrecognizable. Other similar situations began to accumulate over the following weeks and months, building on each other, each one chipping away at her confidence and sense of self a little more like water eroding stone over time. When she tried on a new outfit she'd bought excitedly after saving up for it for weeks, hoping for an enthusiastic compliment and validation that she looked good and attractive, he would casually drop a comment like, "You looked prettier before in your old style, you know. This doesn't suit you at all." Or, "That particular style doesn't really suit your body type. Maybe try something more classic and feminine." Or, "I prefer when you dress more conservative and ladylike. This is too flashy and attention-seeking." Meanwhile, when she mentioned enthusiastically that she was planning to meet a friend she hadn't seen in a while over the weekend, looking forward to catching up on their lives and reconnecting, he would frown with obvious displeasure and disappointment, and ask in a hurt tone if she wouldn't rather spend that precious, limited time with him instead, reminding her that they already saw each other so little during the busy work week, and weekends should be reserved for them as a couple, making her feel guilty and selfish for wanting time apart or maintaining friendships outside their relationship, and she naively believing it was just humor, or that he was being genuinely sincere, because he cared so deeply about her and wanted to help her improve herself and become a better person, began to change herself bit by bit without even realizing what she was doing. She lowered her naturally loud, expressive voice in public to a more acceptable, quiet volume that wouldn't draw attention, avoided going out with friends as often so as not to make him feel neglected or uncomfortable or jealous, rethought every single word before speaking it aloud to make sure it wouldn't upset him or cause conflict or make him withdraw his affection, carefully chose every outfit before wearing it, based on what she thought he would approve of, rather than what she liked, reconsidered every plan before committing to it to ensure it wouldn't conflict with his preferences or upset him in any way. It was absolutely exhausting both mentally and emotionally, like walking on eggshells every single moment of every day, as if she needed to constantly mold and reshape herself to continue being loved and accepted, as if the original, authentic version of her wasn't good enough and needed constant adjustments and improvements to be worthy of remaining by his side as his partner. His control came cleverly disguised as care and loving concern for her well-being, wrapped in phrases specifically designed to sound loving and thoughtful, like, "It's because I worry about you and want the best for you," or, "I just want what's best for you. Can't you see that I'm trying to help you?" Or, "I'm only saying this because I love you so much and want you to be your best self and reach your full potential." And Soo-jin, without fully realizing what was happening to her psychologically and emotionally, began to systematically dim her own natural light that had always shone brightly, to make herself smaller and quieter and less than she was, to fit into the increasingly tight space he left for her to exist as herself, without threatening his ego or control. The months passed in a blur of trying to be perfect, and Soo-jin found herself increasingly distant from who she used to be before him, barely recognizing herself anymore when she caught unexpected glimpses of her reflection in windows or mirrors. Phone calls to friends became rarer and rarer until they almost stopped entirely. Hobbies and activities that once made her genuinely happy and gave her life meaning were set aside and forgotten as frivolous wastes of time that took away from their relationship. And even the photography course she loved so much and had been so excited about was abandoned without a second thought, because Minho always seemed to have something more important for them to do together, some errand or activity or chore that couldn't wait another day. She justified everything to herself and to her increasingly concerned friends, who started asking pointed questions as natural sacrifices that any healthy relationship requires if you want it to work, as proof that she was truly committed and mature, that she knew how to prioritize love above her own selfish desires and needs. But the painful truth is she was systematically erasing herself, deleting her own identity and personality piece by piece until nothing remained of the original person. And the worst part was that she didn't even consciously notice it happening until it was far too late to easily reverse course. She woke up every single day with a heavy emptiness in her chest that she couldn't name or explain to anyone who asked if she was okay, a diffuse sadness that seemed to have no identifiable origin or cause, but was always there, lurking in the background, like a storm cloud, like a silent shadow that followed her everywhere she went, no matter how fast she tried to run. She looked in the mirror and saw someone tired and worn down by life, someone who smiled less and less frequently, and when she did, it never reached her eyes, someone who seemed to be always anxiously trying to guess what the other person wanted, so as not to cause disappointment or conflict or abandonment, walking on eggshells constantly every waking moment. But whenever she thought about questioning any of it, whenever doubt crept in telling her something was fundamentally wrong with this dynamic, Minho had a clever way of making everything seem completely normal and reasonable, of turning the tables and making her feel like she was the problem, that she was overreacting to nothing and being dramatic, that she was too sensitive and emotional and irrational like all women, that she was misinterpreting innocent things and creating problems where none existed just to start fights. And it was precisely in this state of emotional confusion and self-doubt, when she was most vulnerable and her defenses were completely down, that the day of the confession finally arrived and destroyed what little remained of her carefully constructed illusions about their relationship and who he really was. It was his mother's birthday celebration, and Soo-jin had worked incredibly hard to prepare something special and meaningful that would show how much she cared about being part of his family and being accepted by them. She had spent weeks painstakingly putting together an elaborate gift box full of printed photos of happy moments they had all lived together over the past months, carefully arranged chronologically telling a story of their relationship, with a heartfelt letter written by hand in her neatest handwriting, where she expressed how grateful she was to be welcomed into their family and how much she loved their son and appreciated the wonderful woman who raised him to be the person he was today. The party was absolutely beautiful, tastefully decorated with elegant touches everywhere you looked, full of relatives and close family friends laughing and reminiscing about shared memories from years past. And Sujin felt proud and honored to be there, standing beside him as his partner, being warmly introduced as the girlfriend to people who mattered to him, finally feeling like she belonged somewhere important. Everything seemed absolutely perfect, like a scene from a romantic movie, until something shattered the illusion completely in one devastating moment. During dinner, among the laughter and sharing of memories and old family stories that made everyone nostalgic, his mother commented something in a casual tone about the ex-girlfriend who still called from time to time. Poor thing, she never really got over him, still hoping desperately he'll take her back someday even after all this time. Sujin froze completely, her entire body going rigid as if turned to stone. She felt the fork slip from her suddenly numb fingers and tap lightly but distinctly on the plate, producing a sound that seemed to echo loudly in the sudden silence that settled inside her like a tomb, drowning out everything else around her. The people around the table continued talking and laughing, completely oblivious to the emotional earthquake that had just happened inside her chest. She slowly turned her face toward Minho, moving as if underwater, searching his eyes desperately for some explanation, some denial, some sign that she had completely misunderstood. But he immediately looked away, refusing to meet her gaze, and tried to change the subject with a haste that only confirmed everything. That night in the car, when she finally gathered the courage to ask him directly with her voice shaking, he admitted without hesitation or remorse that he'd never stopped talking to his ex-girlfriend regularly. The betrayal was complete and devastating. Everything she thought she knew about him and their relationship was built on lies and deception. The pain of that moment would stay with her for months afterward, haunting her dreams. Later, when they finally left the party and got into his car, the tension between them thick enough to cut with a knife, Sujin couldn't take it anymore, couldn't pretend everything was fine when her world was crumbling. With a trembling voice that she struggled desperately to keep steady and eyes already full of held-back tears that blurred her vision, she asked directly and clearly if he was still talking to his ex-girlfriend regularly, needing to hear him say it out loud, needing confirmation of what she already knew in her gut. The silence that followed her question was absolutely deafening, stretching on forever like torture. Minho kept his eyes fixed straight ahead on the dark road, his hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white with tension, and took so long to respond that Sujin already knew the answer, before he even opened his mouth to speak the words. When he finally spoke, it was without looking at her, without any emotion in his voice, with a carefully casual tone, as if he were commenting on the weather or discussing what to have for dinner, rather than destroying her entire world. I never stopped talking to her. I thought you would understand. She's known me longer than you have. We have history together. We were important to each other. It's not a big deal. You're overreacting. Sujin felt as if she'd been punched hard in the stomach, all the air rushing out of her lungs at once. Not a big deal? What do you mean it's not a big deal? She had spent months systematically erasing herself, molding herself into someone else, giving up essential parts of herself to be the perfect girlfriend he seemed to want, and he was simply maintaining contact with his ex-girlfriend as if it were the most normal and acceptable thing in the world. And worse, much worse, as if she, Sujin, should automatically understand and accept it without complaint, without feeling hurt or betrayed or angry. The silence that came after his casual confession was somehow more painful than any screaming argument could have been. Sujin couldn't find any words, her mind completely blank with shock. She couldn't scream, couldn't cry, couldn't do anything but look out the window at the passing streetlights and feel her entire world collapse around her in slow motion, like a building being demolished floor by floor. Everything she believed about them, about their relationship, about the love she thought they had built together brick by brick over these months, fell apart in seconds, reduced to rubble and dust. Her heart raced so fast, she felt actual physical pain in her chest, sharp and stabbing. Her throat tightened until she could barely breathe, and her hands began to tremble violently in her lap. In that instant, sitting alone inside the car beside him but feeling more distant and isolated than she had ever felt in her entire life, She realized with devastating clarity that she had lost herself completely, trying to be the right choice for someone who didn't even know how to recognize or appreciate what he had beside him. Someone who had never let go of the previous person because he had never really chosen to be with her, never fully committed his heart. And the saddest part of all was that Soo-jin had ignored all the signs that had been there all along, flashing like neon lights in the darkness. Every time he compared her to someone else, every time he made a point of showing that she needed to improve or change, every time he blamed her for feeling insecure instead of reassuring her. Now it all made perfect sense, like puzzle pieces clicking into place to reveal a picture she didn't want to see. She had never been the priority, had never been the first choice. She was just a convenient substitute, someone who was there to fill the space while the other one didn't come back, a placeholder warming the seat. In the following days and weeks after that devastating revelation, her world collapsed inward in silence, imploding rather than exploding outward. Soo-jin woke up every morning with heavy eyes, swollen and puffy from crying so much during the long, sleepless night, with absolutely no desire or motivation to get out of bed and face another day. The bright sunlight coming through the bedroom window seemed like an insult, a cruel reminder that life continued out there, while hers had stopped completely, frozen in this moment of pain and betrayal. She spent hours staring blankly at the ceiling, trying to understand where she had gone wrong, what she could have done differently, why she hadn't been enough for him despite all her efforts. The questions spun endlessly in her head, repeating on a loop, each one more painful than the last. Would he have chosen to stay if she had been prettier, more interesting, more like the other one he couldn't let go of? Was the problem her all along, some fundamental flaw in who she was as a person? Were all the criticisms he made of her true and accurate, and she simply couldn't see her own flaws clearly through her denial? The self-doubt consumed her completely, like a fire burning everything in its path. The mirror became an enemy that she actively avoided. Every time she passed by it in the hallway or bathroom, Soo-jin would look away quickly, but when she did force herself to look directly at her reflection, she saw someone she no longer recognized at all. Every feature of her face reminded her painfully of someone who had tried too hard, who had given everything and received so little in return, who had poured herself out completely for someone who saw her as disposable and replaceable. She saw in her own eyes a deep tiredness that went beyond physical exhaustion, a sadness that went beyond tears, a disappointment that wasn't just with him, but mainly and most painfully with herself for allowing this to happen, for being so blind and naive. She cried softly, always with her face buried deep in the pillow to muffle the sound so neighbors wouldn't hear her pain, and felt overwhelming shame about telling anyone what had happened. Ashamed to admit that she had been so naive and foolish, that she had ignored all the obvious signs everyone else probably saw, that she had lost herself so completely trying to please another person and win his approval and validation. Friends called repeatedly, their concern growing, but she didn't answer, letting it go to voicemail every time. They sent concerned messages asking if everything was okay, and if she needed anything, and she responded with vague excuses when she responded at all, saying she was busy with work projects, that she was fine and just tired, that they would talk soon when things calmed down, avoiding the truth because it was too painful to speak out loud. But the truth was she couldn't talk about it yet, couldn't put into words the depth of pain she felt, because it was a pain that went far beyond the separation from him. It was the much deeper pain of having forgotten who she was, of having betrayed herself and her own values and needs, of having looked in the mirror and not recognized the person staring back. The days dragged on heavy and identical, blurring together into an endless gray monotony without distinction. Soo-jin went to work on complete autopilot, completing tasks mechanically without really thinking or caring, came home and immediately locked herself in her room, avoiding any interaction with roommates or neighbors. She stopped eating properly and preparing real meals, lost a noticeable amount of weight that made her clothes hang loose, and people around began to notice and comment with concern, but she changed the subject quickly, or made excuses about being too busy to eat. She said everything was fine, that it was just tiredness from work stress and a big project. But everything wasn't fine at all. Nothing was fine. It was an emptiness difficult to explain to anyone who hadn't experienced it themselves, as if someone had reached inside her chest and torn out an essential part of her and left a gaping hole in its place that nothing could fill, as if her heart had physically shrunk and now nothing fit inside anymore. Not joy, not hope, not the desire to try again with anyone ever. The pain wasn't just from losing him, but from losing herself, from the late realization that she had given up everything that made her who she was, in exchange for crumbs of affection and validation that were never real to begin with. And deep down beneath all the pain, she knew with certainty that the hardest part wouldn't be forgetting him and moving on, but remembering what it was like to live being herself before all of this happened, before she lost her way and her identity, before she became someone she didn't recognize. But something inside her, buried deep down beneath all the pain and despair and self-recrimination, still pulsed with life and refused to die. A tiny, almost imperceptible desire not to give up completely, not to let this experience destroy her forever and define the rest of her life. It was like a weak flame flickering in the darkness that insisted stubbornly on not going out, even when everything around seemed to conspire for her to quit and give up on herself entirely, and accept that this was her life now. And it was this small, persistent flame of hope that made her, on a rainy autumn afternoon, when the gray sky matched her mood perfectly, finally seek professional help after weeks of isolation. Soo-jin was lying in bed, in the same position she'd been in for hours, staring at the ceiling as she had done so many times in recent days, until she'd memorized every crack and imperfection. When she picked up her phone and, almost without thinking consciously about it, searched for therapy services in her area, her fingers trembled as she filled out the appointment form online, almost backing out several times because it felt like admitting defeat. She felt afraid to talk about all of it out loud to a stranger, afraid of being judged harshly for being so stupid, afraid of hearing from a professional that the problem really was her, that she was fundamentally broken somehow and unlovable. But something bigger and stronger than fear pushed her forward, some survival instinct deep in her bones. And the following week, she found herself sitting in a quiet, peaceful room with soft lighting and comfortable furniture, facing a woman with a gentle, understanding gaze who listened to her pour out her story without interrupting, without judging, without trying to fix everything immediately with ready-made phrases and platitudes that meant nothing. The turning point in her healing journey began discreetly, almost imperceptibly at first, like the sunrise. In the second therapy session, after she had told more of her story and cried through most of it, Soo-jin heard a phrase from her therapist that echoed inside her for weeks afterward, that repeated in her head every single time guilt tried to return and tell her this was all her fault, and she deserved what happened. You don't need anyone's approval to be enough. You are inherently worthy exactly as you are, right now in this moment, without changing anything. Those words seemed so simple, almost obvious when you first hear them, but they had a liberating weight that she could feel physically lifting off her shoulders like a burden being removed. It was as if someone had turned on a bright light in a dark room, and she could finally see clearly what was around her, see the truth of her situation without the distortion. No, she didn't need anyone to validate her worth as a human being. She didn't need to mold herself to fit into others' expectations and demands. She didn't need to be less so that someone else could feel like more. She was enough, complete as herself. She always had been enough. She had just forgotten it along the way, lost sight of this fundamental truth in her desperation to be loved. Gradually, over the following weeks and months of consistent work, Soo-jin began to take care of her own body and mind, with the same dedication and attention she had once reserved exclusively for pleasing others and winning their approval. She woke up earlier than necessary and took short walks at dawn before work, when the city was still quiet and peaceful, and the fresh, cool air helped clear her cluttered mind and racing thoughts. She went back to preparing meals carefully and mindfully, instead of just eating whatever was convenient, choosing colorful, fresh ingredients from the farmer's market, seasoning with attention and care, eating slowly, and savoring each bite as a deliberate act of self-love and self-care rather than just fuel to keep going. She took long baths several times a week, with hot water and essential oils and soft music playing in the background, trying to wash away not just the day's tiredness and grime, but also the guilt and shame that still stubbornly returned now and then to haunt her with whispers that she wasn't good enough. These small rituals and practices seemed insignificant and almost silly at first glance, but for Sujin they were revolutionary and transformative. It was the first time in a very long time that she did something purely for herself, without waiting for anyone's approval or validation, without needing to justify or explain her choices to anyone else. She also reconnected with old friends she had left behind and neglected during the relationship when he was her entire world. The first call was incredibly difficult and awkward, full of uncomfortable pauses and apologies for having disappeared without explanation, for being a bad friend, for choosing a man over them repeatedly. But her friends understood without her having to explain everything in detail. They always understood. And gradually, over coffee dates and long phone calls, Sujin felt that warmth of belonging and acceptance that only true friendship brings, that can't be replicated in romantic relationships built on conditions. They didn't demand detailed explanations about what happened, didn't ask invasive questions about the breakup, or make her relive it. They were just there consistently, ready to listen when she wanted to talk and to distract her with normalcy when she needed to forget for a while. They went for long walks in the park on weekends, went to coffee shops where they laughed at silly things and caught up on each other's lives, watched bad movies together just for the company and comfort of not being alone. And in each of these moments, Sujin felt a piece of herself slowly coming back, returning home to her body and spirit. The laughter that she once held back and controlled now came out loose and loud and genuine without restraint, and she no longer cared at all about the volume or what others might think. The smile that was once measured and careful was now spontaneous and real and reached her eyes. She was finally becoming herself again, remembering who she was before him. She also resumed the photography course she had abandoned months ago, without a second thought when he wanted her time. At first, it was strange and uncomfortable to go back after such a long absence. She felt out of place and behind, like she didn't belong there anymore, as if she had lost the ability to see beauty in ordinary things. But gradually, with the familiar weight of the camera in her hands, and her gaze becoming attentive to small details again, Sujin rediscovered the pleasure of capturing moments and preserving them forever. She photographed flowers growing through cracks in the sidewalk, showing resilience, interesting shadows on walls that changed throughout the day, unknown faces on the subway with stories written in their expressions, the reflection of light dancing on water in the park. Each click of the shutter was a way to reconnect with the world around her and, more importantly, with herself and her own unique perspective that had been silenced. She discovered that she genuinely loved spending time alone with her thoughts, even if it was just sitting in a cafe, reading a book, with no rush to leave, without needing to answer to anyone or explain where she was or what she was doing. These moments of solitude, which once seemed scary and lonely and unbearable, were now sacred and precious and necessary for her well-being. It was there, in her own quiet company, that she found herself again, piece by piece. With each small achievement and milestone in her healing, a part of her breathed again, came back to life slowly. The first day without thinking about him even once was almost imperceptible, but when she realized at night, as she was brushing her teeth, that she had spent the entire day focused on other things, and he hadn't crossed her mind at all, she felt immense relief wash over her like a wave. The first genuine smile that reached her eyes and felt real came on an afternoon when she was editing photos and realized she had created something beautiful, something that was only hers, that no one could take away or diminish. The first moment when she looked in the mirror and recognized herself again, really saw herself, happened on a sunny morning weeks later, when she saw in her own eyes not sadness or defeat anymore, but a serene strength that hadn't been there before, forged in the fire of her pain. Sujin began to understand a profound truth that would change everything. That pain, when faced directly, when crossed through without fleeing or numbing, transforms into something else entirely. It doesn't disappear completely or leave no trace, but it stops being paralyzing and becomes fuel for growth and change. It becomes deep learning. It becomes inner strength. It becomes hard-earned wisdom about who she is and what she deserves. The months passed and continued to pass, and with them, the weight she had been carrying became lighter and lighter, until it was barely noticeable anymore. The seasons changed naturally from autumn to winter to spring, and Sujin noticed that, gradually, she was also changing and transforming along with them, like a butterfly emerging from a cocoon into something new. She no longer searched desperately for answers or closure in messages that never came and never would, because he didn't owe her anything. She no longer checked his social media obsessively at 3 a.m. to see if he was okay, if he was with someone new, if he was sorry for what he did, if he regretted losing her and wished he could have her back. None of that mattered anymore. None of it had power over her or controlled her emotions. Instead of looking backward, she sought peace and contentment in the small things she herself could offer to herself, things that were entirely within her control and didn't depend on anyone else. A peaceful walk at dusk, watching the sky change colors and the world slow down. A song that touched her heart deeply and made her feel understood. A deep, meaningful conversation with a friend about life and dreams and fears. A new dish she learned to cook by following a recipe carefully and adjusting it to her taste. A book that made her see the world from a completely different angle and expanded her perspective beyond her own experience. They were simple details that most people would overlook or take for granted, but together they composed a life that finally made sense again, a life that felt like hers and belonged to her. One ordinary day that started like any other, while taking photos at a new coffee shop she had discovered by accident while exploring her neighborhood. A young man who worked there behind the counter making drinks complimented her artistic eye and unique approach to photography. He said sincerely that he rarely saw someone photograph such common, ordinary things with such sensitivity and meaning, making the mundane look beautiful and worthy of attention. Sujin smiled genuinely from the heart, thanked him sincerely for the kind words, and went on with her day without thinking about anything but the present moment and the beautiful light coming through the large windows. She didn't start imagining if he was interested in her romantically, or analyzing his intentions. Didn't analyze every word he said looking for hidden meanings or subtext. Didn't feel the desperate need to impress him, or make herself smaller, so as not to intimidate him with her intelligence or passion or intensity. She simply accepted the compliment for exactly what it was, genuine recognition of her work and her eye, and continued living her life fully. For the first time in a very long time, she didn't feel the need to prove herself worthy to anyone. She didn't feel the desperate need to seek external validation to know she was on the right path and making good choices. She just felt gratitude and peace settling in her chest. Gratitude for being there in that moment, alive and breathing, whole, rebuilt piece by careful piece. And there, sitting between a steaming cup of coffee and the soft, satisfying click of the camera capturing the afternoon light, she understood something simple and profound that would forever change the way she related to herself and others going forward, a truth that would guide her for the rest of her life. True love is light and effortless. It begins from within yourself first and reflects naturally in everything you do. This understanding didn't come dramatically to her, with beams of light or cinematic revelations or sudden epiphanies like in movies. It came quietly, gradually, in an internal whisper that slowly gained volume over time until it became impossible to ignore or deny. Sujin understood that she had spent so much time and energy looking in others for what only she could give herself, searching externally for something that could only ever come from within her own heart. She had sought desperately in Minho, and before him in so many others who didn't deserve her, confirmation that she was worthy of love and attention and care, that she mattered and had value in the world. But the truth is that this confirmation never truly comes from outside. It can't. It might come temporarily and feel good, in the fleeting form of compliments and caring gestures. But if there isn't a solid, unshakable foundation of self-worth within you, any strong wind knocks you down, and you're back where you started feeling worthless. And Sujin had been knocked down hard by this experience. She had fallen, had shattered into pieces, had stayed on the ground for a while, not knowing if she could or even wanted to get up again and keep going. But she got up anyway. And she didn't get up to prove anything to anyone, not to show him what he lost, not to get revenge or make him regret. She got up because she realized her life was far too valuable and precious to be wasted in relationships that made her feel small and less than she was. Today, Sujin looks back at that painful period of her life and sees that version of herself who molded herself for him, who kept quiet when she should have spoken up, who gave up on herself and feels immense tenderness and compassion rather than anger or shame or embarrassment. She doesn't feel anger toward that version of herself who made those choices out of fear and insecurity. She doesn't feel shame for being vulnerable and trusting someone who didn't deserve it. She feels compassion and understanding and forgiveness, because that was a woman who was doing the very best she could with the emotional tools and self-knowledge she had at the time, operating from a place of deep insecurity and fear of abandonment. A woman who believed that love required sacrifice of self, that relationships only worked when you tried harder than the other person and gave more, that being chosen depended entirely on becoming the exact person the other wanted, erasing yourself completely. But now she knows with certainty that none of that is true or healthy. She knows that healthy relationships don't require you to erase yourself or become someone else entirely. She knows that true love celebrates who you are authentically, not who you could be if you changed everything fundamental about yourself. She knows that being chosen has absolutely no value or meaning if you had to stop being yourself, if you had to betray your own soul and values for it to happen. And Soojin also understands now a paradoxical truth about loss and growth, that losing someone can actually be the first crucial step to finding yourself again, to coming home to yourself after being lost. That sometimes the greatest blessing, though it doesn't feel like it at the time when you're drowning in pain, is when the person who wasn't meant for you decides to leave, or when you find the strength to walk away, even if in the moment it seems like a curse or the end of the world. Because it's in the emptiness that remains, in that painful open space where the other person's presence used to be, that you finally have the room and opportunity to rediscover yourself, to remember who you were before you got lost, trying to be who they wanted, to build and create consciously who you want to be from here forward. And this journey inward, as difficult and painful as it may be, is the most important one anyone can make in their lifetime. It's the journey back home to yourself, back to your own soul that was always there waiting. Today, when Soojin wakes up in the morning in her sun-filled bedroom, she no longer feels that heavy weight pressing down on her chest, making it hard to breathe and face the day. She doesn't wake up thinking about him immediately, or wondering what he's doing, doesn't wonder anymore what he's doing or who he's with now, doesn't blame herself anymore for not having been enough for him despite all her efforts and sacrifices. She wakes up and thinks about the day ahead with anticipation and curiosity, about the small joys she'll experience, about the photos she'll take, about the conversations she'll have, about the coffee she'll savor slowly without rushing. She wakes up and feels whole and complete in herself. She wakes up and feels at peace with herself and her choices and her past. And this peace, this feeling of being genuinely okay with herself exactly as she is something no one can ever take away from her again, because it doesn't depend on anyone else's opinion or approval or validation. It depends only on her and her relationship with herself, and she finally learned after all this pain to give herself everything she once desperately sought in others. She no longer feels anger toward Minho when she thinks about him, which is rare now. She no longer feels sadness or loss or longing. She feels, strangely and unexpectedly, gratitude, because it was in that relationship, in that specific pain, in that suffocating silence where she couldn't speak her truth without fear, that she truly heard herself for the first time. It was there, at rock bottom when she thought she couldn't sink any lower, that she found the strength she didn't know she possessed within herself. It was there in the darkness that she learned to truly love herself authentically, without depending on anyone's approval or validation, without needing to mold herself into someone more acceptable to others, without fear of being too much or not enough for anyone in her life. And this profound discovery of herself and her own worth is worth more than any relationship she could have had with him or with anyone else. Today, Soojin knows she's ready for love again someday when the time is right, but on completely different terms than before, but a different kind of love than she sought before when she didn't know her worth, a love that doesn't require her to diminish herself or hide parts of who she is to be acceptable, a love that doesn't come disguised as control or manipulation or possession, a love that genuinely celebrates who she is, with all the imperfections and flaws, with all the peculiarities and quirks, with all the intensity and passion that makes her unique, and more importantly than anything else, she knows that if that kind of love doesn't come, if she never finds it, it's completely okay, and she'll be fine, because she already has the most important love of all, unconditional self-love that doesn't waver, and with that foundation, she's unstoppable. With that, she's complete. With that, she is, finally and forever, enough. And if you're reading this story right now and going through something similar in your own life, if you're feeling lost within a relationship that makes you feel small and worthless, if you're doubting your own worth because someone made you believe you're not good enough as you are, take a deep breath right now. You are not alone in this pain. This pain you feel now, this confusion, this emptiness, all of this is temporary, even though it feels permanent and endless. It may not seem like it now in this dark moment, but you will come out on the other side of this stronger than before. You'll come out more aware of who you are and what you truly deserve from others. And you'll look back one day and be grateful that you had the courage not to accept less than you deserve, that you chose yourself finally. Life always offers new chances to start over, even when it seems like everything is over and done and there's no hope. Even when you think you won't be able to get up again, that the pain is too great to survive, that you'll never be happy again or trust again. Life surprises us in beautiful ways. Life heals wounds we thought were fatal and permanent. Life teaches lessons we didn't know we needed to learn. And sometimes, the greatest gift someone can give you is to leave and give you space for you to become who you always were meant to be, without their limitations. So breathe deeply right now. Cry if you need to. Let it all out. Feel the pain fully. Don't run from it or numb it with distractions. But don't lose yourself in it either or let it define you. Because on the other side of that pain is a stronger, more aware, more whole version of you waiting patiently to be reborn. And that version will thank you for not giving up when it was hardest. Always remember this truth, because it's real even when it hurts, even when it seems impossible to believe. You don't need anyone's approval to be enough. You already are enough exactly as you are. You always have been enough from the beginning. You just needed to remember this truth that got buried. And now that you've remembered, don't forget again. Don't give up on yourself for anyone. Don't diminish yourself to fit into small spaces that were never meant for you. Don't accept crumbs when you deserve the whole feast. Because you are enough exactly as you are in this moment. You are valuable beyond measure. You are worthy of a love that celebrates you, not one that diminishes you or makes you feel small. And if someone can't see that, if they can't recognize your worth, the problem isn't you and never was. It never was you. The problem is that they weren't ready for everything you have to offer the world. And that's okay, and not your responsibility to fix. Let go with grace, and move forward with your head held high, because your best is still to come. If this story touched you deeply, if you saw yourself in it somehow, leave a heart in the comments and share it with someone who needs to hear this today. Someone who's feeling small, someone who's doubting themselves, someone who needs to be reminded that they are enough exactly as they are. Subscribe to the channel for more real stories like this. Stories that talk about real life, about pain and healing, about losing and finding yourself again. Turn on notifications so you don't miss any new videos we post. And always remember, every single day, as many times as necessary until it becomes absolute truth within you. You are enough, exactly as you are right now. You always have been enough, and you will continue to be enough, with or without anyone's approval or validation. Because the love that truly matters most begins within you and radiates outward.